Mental minimalism. We live in an age where silence has become a luxury, where thoughts compete with notifications, and where peace is constantly interrupted by screens that never rest. Our minds are overloaded, constantly scrolling through endless feeds of information, opinions, and noise. And yet, amid this chaos, there's a quiet rebellion rising, the pursuit of mental minimalism. Mental minimalism is not about having an empty mind. It is about having a clear one. It is not the absence of thought, but the awareness of which thoughts deserve to stay. It is the art of choosing, of filtering, of saying no, not only to material excess, but to the invisible clutter that fills our inner world. The modern world feeds on our attention. Every vibration, every sound, every red notification bubble is a hook thrown into our consciousness. We think we are in control, but often it is the device in our hands that decides what we feel next. Seneca once said, "To be everywhere is to be nowhere." And that is exactly what happens when we allow our minds to be spread thin across dozens of open tabs, constant messages, and endless comparisons. We lose the depth of being present. We forget that wisdom is not measured by how much we consume, but by how deeply we understand what we allow to enter. The philosopher Pascal wrote, "All of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone." Hundreds of years have passed, yet his words feel more relevant than ever. We have built machines to connect us, but they have also built walls of distraction. We scroll, we watch, we react, but we rarely reflect. Mental minimalism begins where the noise ends. It begins in the space where thought can breathe, where the mind can rest long enough to understand itself. It is not an escape from life, but a return to it. Because only when the mind is uncluttered can it perceive what truly matters. The constant flood of information we face each day is unprecedented. News, headlines, trends, opinions, all competing for a single resource: our attention. And attention is not infinite. It is life itself, the essence of consciousness. To waste attention is to waste the very substance of living. Nietzsche once said, "The man who cannot command himself will obey." In the context of our time, that means this: those who cannot master their attention become slaves to algorithms. Our phones are not evil. They are mirrors. They reflect our mental habits, our addictions, our inability to be alone. We wake up and reach for the phone before our own thoughts. We check messages before we check how we feel. We scroll through other people's lives before we've even started our own day. And each small act of distraction fragments the mind, like a glass shattering into 1,000 pieces. Minimalism in thought is a way of gathering those fragments again. It is learning to slow down the mind that has been taught to run endlessly. It is rediscovering the beauty of focus, the serenity of simplicity. Socrates once said, "The secret of change is to focus all your energy not on fighting the old, but on building the new." That applies perfectly to our minds. Instead of fighting distractions, we must build spaces of stillness. Instead of resisting the chaos, we must cultivate inner order. Minimalism is not about rejecting technology or isolating ourselves from the world. It is about creating boundaries, spaces where silence can exist again, because silence is not emptiness. Silence is presence. A minimalist mind does not rush to react. It observes, it breathes, it chooses. It does not drown in the flood of opinions. It stands firm in clarity. We have confused being informed with being wise, but wisdom comes not from knowing everything, but from knowing what truly matters. To think clearly in a world that profits from our confusion is an act of rebellion. The Stoics taught that we cannot control external events, only our inner response to them. And that is where mental minimalism finds its strength in reclaiming sovereignty over one's own attention. The greatest wealth of the future will not be data, followers, or possessions. It will be clarity, the ability to think independently, to feel deeply, and to decide consciously what to let in. And so, mental minimalism becomes not just a philosophy, but a form of resistance, a way of saying, "My mind belongs to me." True clarity begins when the noise fades, when the mind dares to face its own silence. Silence can be intimidating because it reveals everything that distraction hides. It uncovers our restlessness, our fears, our desires, our unspoken thoughts. But in that same silence lives the seed of understanding, the place where real thought begins to form. The philosopher Epictetus said, "No man is free who is not master of himself." And self-mastery begins in the unseen, in the way we manage our inner dialogue, in the way we filter what deserves to stay in our consciousness. Mental minimalism is the art of curating your thoughts as an artist curates a gallery. Not every image deserves a frame, not every idea deserves your attention, and yet, we treat every passing impulse as something urgent, responding to each like it holds the key to meaning. Our ancestors once gazed at the stars to understand the universe. We now gaze at screens to understand ourselves, and often find only confusion. The philosopher Thoreau, who sought simplicity at Walden Pond, once wrote, "Our life is frittered away by detail. Simplify, simplify." He meant that to live fully, we must strip away what is not essential. To think clearly, we must do the same. Our minds have become crowded cities full of movement, noise, and artificial light. We build skyscrapers of ideas, but forget the open fields where we used to breathe. The minimalist mind, on the other hand, is like a quiet forest, alive, but peaceful, dynamic, but ordered by nature. When you practice mental minimalism, you begin to see how much energy is wasted on what doesn't matter. The endless opinions of strangers, the false urgency of online outrage, the invisible race to stay updated. All of it drains what is most valuable. Your focus. Focus is the new form of wealth, because in a world that constantly demands your attention, the ability to hold it is power. But minimalism is not a cold discipline. It is an act of love for the mind itself. A mind that rests can see beauty again. A mind that breathes can understand again. A mind that slows down can finally hear what the heart has been trying to say all along. The philosopher Lao Tzu wrote, "To the mind that is still, the whole universe surrenders." Stillness is not weakness. It is strength refined. It is the calm that remains unshaken even when the world is in turmoil. The modern mind rarely experiences this calm. We live in a constant state of stimulation. Dopamine loops, engineered to keep us scrolling, swiping, consuming. We confuse movement with progress, reaction with relevance, speed with success. But wisdom grows slowly. It requires silence, reflection, and patience. The very things our current culture avoids. Mental minimalism is a quiet revolution against that pace. It asks, gently but firmly, do you really need all this? Do you need to consume every piece of news, every opinion, every image? Do you need to compare your journey to millions of others online? Do you need to fill every second of silence with sound? Philosopher Schopenhauer once wrote, "Intellect is invisible to the man who has none. In the same way, stillness is invisible to those who have forgotten how to stop. But those who do stop, even for a moment, begin to notice something profound. Life is not running away from us. We are running away from life." The constant rush to consume, post, respond, and react is a way of avoiding the discomfort of existing fully. Mental minimalism is about returning to that fullness, not by adding, but by subtracting. By reducing the noise, we rediscover the melody. By releasing excess, we make room for truth. The great Stoics taught that we should not try to possess everything, but to understand what is enough. The same applies to thought. You don't need to think about everything. You need to think deeply about what matters. When you start clearing the mind, at first, there is discomfort. The silence feels heavy. The absence of distraction feels like loss. But then, something changes. You begin to feel lighter, freer, more aware. You begin to notice details, the sound of the wind, the pattern of your breath, the subtle rhythm of time passing. What once felt empty becomes sacred. This is the paradox of mental minimalism. The less you carry, the more you perceive. And perception is everything. It shapes how we love, how we create, how we live. The human mind, when uncluttered, becomes luminous, capable of insight, creativity, and peace. But when it's crowded with noise, it turns foggy, anxious, and reactive. Marcus Aurelius, the Stoic emperor, once wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." That realization is the foundation of mental minimalism. Understanding that peace does not come from control, but from clarity. When you learn to choose what deserves your attention, you reclaim the most sacred resource you own: awareness. And awareness is what transforms experience into meaning. We live in times when thinking itself feels like rebellion, not because we lack time, but because we fear what the silence may reveal. Noise distracts us, but it also protects us. Protects us from introspection, from doubt, from truly seeing ourselves. But a life lived behind the veil of noise is not a life of freedom. It is a life of avoidance. Clarity demands courage. The courage to listen to your own thoughts, to face the stillness, to ask uncomfortable questions. Mental minimalism is not about thinking less. It's about thinking better. It's not about avoiding the world, but about engaging with it consciously. It's about quality over quantity, depth over speed. Viktor Frankl, a psychiatrist who survived concentration camps, said, "Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space lies our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom." And that space, small, fragile, often forgotten, is the heart of mental minimalism. It is where peace, clarity, and consciousness live. In today's world, our phones have become mirrors, reflecting not only information, but also the state of our minds. Every time we reach for them, we are often reaching away from ourselves. Each swipe, each scroll, is a tiny escape from presence, from boredom, from being. But boredom is fertile. It is the soil of creation, of reflection, of depth. Without boredom, there is no imagination. Without pause, there is no wisdom. Mental minimalism restores that fertile silence. It gives the mind permission to breathe again, to wander freely without getting lost. It is the practice of returning to presence, to the now. Everything around us screams for attention. And the more we try to keep up, the further we drift from who we are. But there is a way back. It begins with small gestures, silencing notifications, reading less, but with more depth. Speaking without rushing, breathing before reacting, walking without headphones, watching the sunrise without taking a photo. These acts may seem small, but together they build something vast. Serenity is the home of clear thought. The mind, like a tree, grows stronger when pruned. You don't cut to weaken it, but to allow light to reach its roots. When you let go of mental excess, energy returns to the essential. The mind blooms again. Jean-Paul Sartre once said, "Man is condemned to be free." That freedom is both a burden and a gift. And perhaps the purest way to exercise it is to decide what not to think, what not to consume, what not to carry. True discipline is the art of choosing wisely where your attention rests. Mental minimalism is the silence between noises, the pause between tasks, the space between one idea and the next. The moment when you realize that you can think less and understand more. Understanding is not the accumulation of answers, but the wisdom to ask the right questions. Socrates said the unexamined life is not worth living. But to examine life, you must first listen to it. And to listen, you must embrace silence. Perhaps, then, the true invitation of mental minimalism is not to step away from the world, but to step closer to yourself, to disconnect, not to escape. That's to return, to see the simple, the natural, the human once again. Remember, your mind is a garden, and it is your choice what to cultivate. Imagine a mind that is clean, without rush, without noise, without the weight of comparison or digital urgency. A mind that breathes, that observes, that feels. That is the minimalist mind. Not because it thinks less, but because it thinks better. And perhaps, in the end, wisdom is simply this: to see that life was always here, that the essential never shouted, and that silence, that old forgotten friend, is still the purest sound of truth. That the world remains noisy, may there always be, within you, a quiet space, steady, clear, and calm. Because it is within that space that clarity is born. And within that clarity, that mental minimalism stops being a concept and becomes a way of living.